We're hearing two prophetic texts for our readings this morning. One will be one of the assigned Bible readings for the day, and the other is from James Baldwin. This is something he wrote in 1962. He put out, or 62 or 63, he put out there's a long essay called The Fire Next Time, but that started with a briefer piece that I've taken an excerpt from this morning. My Dungeon Shook, Letter to My Nephew on the 100th Anniversary of the Emancipation. So he does a little reflecting on to his nephew. He does a little reflecting on his childhood and his brother's childhood, his brother being the father of his nephew. And he is a contemporary prophet whose words still hold truth for us today. And where I've taken a couple places I've taken from, he writes, I know what the world has done to my brother and how narrowly he has survived it. And I know which is much worse, and this is the crime of which I accuse my country and my countrymen, and for which neither I, nor time, nor history will ever forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives, and do not know it and do not want to know it. We can question that part these days, I think. Nonetheless, one can be, indeed, one must strive to become tough and philosophical concerning destruction and death, for this is what most of humankind has been best at since we have heard of humans. But remember, most of humankind is not all of humankind. But it is not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. Take no one's word for anything, including mine, but trust your experience. Know whence you came. If you know whence you came, there is really no limit to where you can go. The details and symbols of your life have been deliberately constructed to make you believe what white people say about you. Please try to remember that what they believe, as well as what they do and cause you to endure, does not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and fear. Please try to be clear, dear James, through the storm which rages about your youthful head today, about the reality which lies behind the words acceptance and integration. There is no reason for you to become like white people, and there is no basis whatever for their impertinent assumption that they must accept you. The really terrible thing, old buddy, is that you must accept them, and I mean that very seriously. You must accept them and accept them with love, for these innocent people, again, innocence is the crime in his word, these innocent people have no other hope. They are, in fact, still trapped in a history which they do not understand, and until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. Contemporary prophet. The ancient prophet, Jeremiah. This is from Jeremiah 4. At that time it will be said to this people and to Jerusalem, a hot wind comes from me, God speaking here, out of the bare heights, in the desert, toward the daughter of my people, not to winnow or cleanse, a wind too strong for that. It is I who speak in judgment against them. For my people are foolish, for they do not know me. They are stupid children. They have no understanding. They're skilled in doing evil, but do not know how to do good. Then the voice switches so that the prophet is speaking on his own. He says, I looked on the earth, and it was complete chaos, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I looked on the mountains, and they were quaking. All the hills moved to and fro. I looked, and there was no one at all, and all the birds of the air had fled. I looked, and the fruitful land was a desert, and all its cities were laid in ruins before the Lord, before God's fierce anger. For this is what God says. The whole land shall be a desolation. Yet I will not make a full end. Because of this, the earth shall mourn, and the heavens above grow dark, for I have spoken. I have purposed it, I have not relented, nor will I turn back. Sometimes we say this is God's good news. We struggle for God's good news, although we can think about what judgment is necessary these days. So we'll call it God's good news. Karma, I'm starting with a story that I took from this book, in case anyone is interested. Love's Braided Dance, Hope in a Time of Crisis by Norman Wiersbe. This is the story that he starts the book with. It's about a man named Carmine Mena and his wife Rosaria. Carmine's political awakening began while he was on vacation. It was supposed to be a few days at sea. Carmine and Rosaria have a boat that's big enough to sleep over on, and they took 6 of their friends out on their boat off the coast of their home, the island of Lampedusa, which is in between Italy and Tunisia. It was a fun and relaxing outing. Until one morning, they woke up and heard screaming out on the water. So they navigated their boat to the sound, and what they found there floating, spread out, was the debris of a ship. It had been filled with migrants who were trying to make their way into Europe. And now there were hundreds of people floating and thrashing on the water. Some of them were dead already. Some of them were clearly exhausted and at the end of their energy. All of them who were still living were desperate. The situation was totally overwhelming for Carmine, for his friends. They weren't trained in sea rescue. Their boats could not clearly hold all of those people who were out there. So they had to make choices, but they could not just let themselves leave. So they started pulling people out of the water and into the boat. And Wiersbe writes, Carmine was surprised by the visceral attachment he suddenly felt pulling the first young man aboard. He wanted to hug and comfort him like a protective parent. To this day, he has not forgotten the feel of the young man's hand in his, nor the power that flowed through his body as he reached out to grab hold of yet another person, wanting and willing each of them to survive. He says he never felt more alive in his life than at that very moment. His muscles tingled and his nerves sparked with energy, and when the Coast Guard finally came, he could not fathom the captain's order to stop the rescue effort. We know this story in its many versions. The story of nations that have built up wealth by taking resources from other nations and other people and then doing all they can to keep those people out of their own borders. Most of the people on that boat were refugees from the East African nation of Eritrea, which Italy once held as a colony. In this country, we use the desert as a deadly border guard. In parts of Europe, it's the Mediterranean Sea that does the dirty work. Since 2000, at least 30,000 people have died at sea trying to cross. The day that Carmine, Rosaria, and their friends got involved in their nation's migrant crisis, there were other people on other boats who ignored the screams. 368 people died when that ship went down. But 47 made it to shore on Carmine and Rosaria's boat because they couldn't just move by. All too easily, the group of migrants could have died. It could have been a full and complete devastation. But the Menas and their friends wrote an alternate history of the tragedy that day, which doesn't and shouldn't stop us from calling it a tragedy and seeing the larger set of tragedies that it's a part of, which we also see more or less every day, don't we, if we're paying attention? The kidnappings, the deportations without due process, the chaos, the vindictiveness that's coming from the top part of our leadership. I don't really have to go through this whole litany. You all are smart people who are paying attention. You know the danger that we're in, increasing danger as political assassinations make violence more widespread. I will confess that some mornings I can't even make myself read the newspaper. Skimming the headlines is about all that I can manage on those days. I already know it's bad. I don't need to be paralyzed and steamrolled by the details of things that I can't directly impact. And I already know that I have to commit myself each day to supporting what is good and merciful and just and right, and joining forces with other people who are doing the same. I want to be an editor. Let me back up on that claim. This is a very roundabout way, I suppose. This morning we read a very bleak passage about a very angry God from a very anguished prophet. Jeremiah lived and preached and prophesied in the last decade that his nation, Judah, existed as an independent country, before the Babylonian Empire rolled in and colonized it. He lived through a troop buildup, think maybe of Ukraine leading up to February 2022, and then through a siege, think of the historic Gaza and the contemporary Gaza. He lived through an ill-fated rebellion against Babylon that happened in part because Egypt promised help, but they never delivered on it. The Bible is full of ancient geopolitics that feel very contemporary. He thought he would still live out the days. He lived through the colonization. He thought he would live out his days still in the capital city of Jerusalem. But then somebody assassinated the governor that Babylon had installed, and Jeremiah was carried off against his will into Egypt because the people who carried him off were pretty certain that Babylon was going to respond with indiscriminate violence and murder. He presumably lived out the rest of his days in Egypt. This book that bears his name, it is very heavy. It is almost like reading the news and more. It's saturated with doom. It's not for nothing that Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. He berates his nation, like all of the biblical prophets do, for unfaithfulness and for exploiting poor people. There are a couple of places at which he suggests that some of his people might have even engaged in child sacrifice. It's pretty bleak stuff. But he saw very clearly the trouble that his country was in, and he spoke to it forcefully. It's not clear whether he thought anything could be done about it. It's not clear, for one, because prophets were truth tellers, not fortune tellers. But for another, it's not clear because the book of Jeremiah that made it into the Hebrew and Christian Bible, look at me like a Bible kind of preacher, that made it into the Hebrew and Christian Bibles did not come to us straight from his hands. Here you go. It went through a process of collecting and reorganizing with some different stuff added to it. It went through editors. It came to us through editors who organized it and shaped it and added to it. Added, for instance, a little bit to the passage that we just read this morning. This passage that talks about hard and horrifying vision of the earth quaking, the sky gone dark, the agricultural land all barren, the animals having fled, the cities laid waste. It was terrible, terrifying, unrelenting doom scroll of the prophet's imagination, put down in words and conveyed entirely through poetry. It was a poem, except for one line. He saw it coming. Babylon the Great, preparing to unleash destruction on Judah, on the holy city Jerusalem. He wrote this devastation, devastation, devastation as a poem, but there is a random prose line that is thrown into the poem that doesn't fit. Can you guess what it was? For thus says the Lord, the whole land shall be a desolation, yet I will not make a full end. That's an editor hearing the disillusionment and the despair and creating room inside of it to breathe still. Jeremiah wasn't wrong to see the suffering that was already there and the suffering that was yet to come. He wasn't wrong to diagnose that his country helped cause some of the suffering of its most vulnerable residents, that this helped bring about wider suffering because we're all connected and none of us are free until all of us are free. None of us is free till all of us are free. I need an editor too. Because we are all connected. He wasn't wrong to name tragedy for what it is. He told the necessary truths. But there's another truth to hold alongside those, which is that empires will end. At some point, the machinery of death will run out of fuel to burn. At some point, people will pick up the pieces. Maybe even some of the people who are already picking up the pieces and waiting to use them to build something new. They'll pick them up and rebuild. The age is awful. This much is true. And no matter how awful it is, there are still people acting in love, still people engaging creatively with each other, still people making music and art, still people making resistance as an alternate reality to what the empire says. This is also true. It is awful, and the Spirit is working. And an editor saw that and made it part of the permanent record. A little over a week ago, I went down to City Hall. I gathered with the New Sanctuaries movement of Philadelphia. They had a letter with them that was signed by about 120 faith leaders in the city. Our two names were on it. It urged Mayor Parker to keep Philadelphia living into its identity as a sanctuary city. We gathered outside the front corner of City Hall. We sang, we prayed, we heard some people speak, and then a couple of clergy representatives took the letter inside, and they made it as far as giving it to one of Mayor Parker's aides. While the rest of us waited outside, we paired up and we blessed each other. We had commissioned the clergy representatives who would go inside. And while they were in, we paired up, we blessed each other. We took turns offering the priestly blessing that comes from the book of Exodus. May God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May God look upon you with favor and grant you peace. We anointed each other with oil. It was an act led by rabbis, an act of commissioning. We commissioned each other. Commissioned as editors, as actors, as agents of history, and not just its subjects. Editors wielding pens in an age of tragedy to keep writing love where there seems to be only hatred, to keep writing courage where fear prevails, to write justice on the pages of corruption, to insert the phrases that remind us to breathe the Spirit even when the times suck all the oxygen out of the air. Editors who remind us that fascists are temporary, even though they pretend to be eternal. In Lampedusa, Carmine and Rosaria Mena found themselves transformed by their experience out on the sea. They were more human, heartbroken, and more fully alive. Migrants were no longer an abstract issue to them. They had touched the core of life and death. They saw the sickness and the rot at the heart of their own culture. And they found themselves deeply invested in the people they had helped to pull out of the ocean. After the rescue, all of those people, the 47 people from their boat and whatever were taken on the Coast Guard vessels, they were all moved north. But a year later, some of them came back to see the place of their tragedy and their rescue, and to see people who had stopped to help. As they approached each other, one of the migrants wrapped Rosaria in a bear hug and showed her a T-shirt that she had given him after helping to get him out of the water. He kept it as a sign of kindness that he had received and held on to it through all the indignities of the refugee camps. Two others brought a drawing that they made, just of a hand reaching up out of water and another hand reaching down from sky. They all climbed into the Mena's boat and sailed back out into the water. And when they got to the site of the accident, they stopped there. And everybody held hands. And people were sobbing, and people were praying. They threw flowers on the water as a gift and a memorial to those who hadn't made it. A teenager pointed to the water and said, "This was where I died," and then pointed to the boat. Said, "This is where I was reborn." It's a terrible ending that day for a migrant ship. A painful ending. An ending that was not a full and final ending because there were editors. There are always editors, which is what we are called to be. When they think they have written the end, just keep speaking. God, as the UCC has said for quite a long time, is still speaking. Even when the poem feels finished, we can go back and add something new. And this is God's good news. Amen.